Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment of Health Professional Radio. Millennials often prioritize living their best lives by ignoring symptoms or postponing a doctor visit, which is easy to do around the busy holiday season, of course. But when it comes to a disease like multiple sclerosis, which millennials are in an age group most likely to be diagnosed, delaying diagnosis and treatment can negatively impact their health. Well, here to share their insights on life with MS, the impact of this disease, and the importance of early diagnosis and treatment is Trish Palmer, a travel nurse living with MS, and Dr. Martin Belkin from the Michigan Institute for Neurological Disorders. Hello and welcome, both Trish Palmer and Dr. Martin Belkin.
Hello.
Hello.
Dr. Belkin, let's start with you. What is MS and why is early diagnosis and treatment so important?
So MS, or multiple sclerosis, it's a lifelong autoimmune condition. It affects about 1 million adults in the United States. Average age of diagnosis is about 34, so it's that millennial generation that's where we see the average age of diagnosis. So it's people who are starting their careers, starting their families. However, if MS goes untreated or undiagnosed, it can eventually lead to irreversible physical disabilities. So for example, it can lead to issues with vision, issues with weakness or numbness in the extremities, balance problems, fatigue, amongst other symptoms. So it's critically important that we get people to not ignore symptoms. And if MS is the diagnosis, get on an effective therapy early.
Trish, if you would, tell us a little bit about your experience with multiple sclerosis and how it's impacted your life.
You know, I was kind of in the prime of my life when I was diagnosed. When I first had symptoms, it was actually, I woke up one day with numbness and tingling on my whole right side, and it was terrifying. I had no idea what it meant, and I ignored it. But a short time later, I did seek treatment because it started to get worse. And when I was eventually diagnosed, it was with relapsing multiple sclerosis. So at that initial visit with my neurologist, he said, you need to get on a disease-modifying therapy now, like as soon as possible. To start treatment early was so important. And my concerns were varied, and they were mostly about my lifestyle and also my future. So addressing both of those, Ocrevus with a twice yearly dosing schedule really helped. Ocrevus gives me the freedom to be myself and live my life and not have to think about things. But twice a year, I get my infusion, and I other than that, I exist as a person living, working, traveling, going on adventures, and it makes me more hopeful for my future if I can stay as normal as possible now.
Dr. Belkin, in your opinion, why is it so important to increase awareness of MS among the younger generation?
Yeah, so part of the reason I'm here on behalf of Genentech to raise awareness about multiple sclerosis and get patients to advocate for their own health. So we were talking about millennials, and millennials tend to approach life a little differently than prior generations. They really focus on living their life and put healthcare maybe second. And so what we want to emphasize is maybe to put healthcare first if you start having symptoms, particularly at millennial generation, and see a healthcare professional. And if MS is ultimately the diagnosis, then it's important to get on a treatment early. And part of the reason is we know that MS, and what we learned as of even recent years, is that it's progressive from the start. And so someone can be feeling well and have minimal symptoms, but there could be progression going on behind the scenes. And if they go untreated, eventually that may catch up with them and lead to disability or lead to symptoms. So we want to emphasize the need to see a healthcare provider of their symptoms, get on treatment. That being said, treatments have risks and side effects. So it's so important to work with a healthcare provider, make sure the treatment's going to be appropriate for that given person and it's going to work for them.
Trish, as someone who's living with MS, who's been through the initial diagnosis, what advice do you have for those newly diagnosed with MS?
It's a really isolating feeling to be diagnosed with something with such a big question mark in your future. The best thing I ever did, and one of the hardest, was to reach out to people, other people with MS. There's advocacy organizations and online resources. You can be in person. You can do a over the internet support group. There's so many resources, but not isolating yourself is huge. And also being an advocate for yourself. I make sure to, have my own best interest at heart and to follow up with things. And, because ultimately it's my future at stake. And it's really empowering to be your own advocate and to take control in that way.
Dr. Belkin, where can our listeners go and get some more information?
Yes, so they can go to ocrevus.com where they can learn more about MS and a potential disease-modifying therapy that may be right for them, learn more about the safety and prescribing information, and just learn more about the disease itself where they can take control of it for themselves.
Trish, Dr. Belkin, I want to thank both of you for joining us here on Health Professional Radio. Thank you so much for giving us this valuable information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Trish Palmer and Dr. Martin Belkin. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/healthprofessionalradio.